Hello, dear friends. My talk today is based on a talk I gave on Shavuot, Festival of Shavuot, which is called the Festival of the Giving of the Torah, where we read the Decalogue, what's called the Ten Commandments, in the synagogue. And I call it four perspectives or four ways of looking at the Ten Commandments. This is actually perspective number 3. I will fill in the others at another date. Perspective number 3 is to look at the commandments as steps towards understanding the relationship between man and God and the relationship between man and man. What I call a Jewish approach to understanding the relationship between man and God and man and man. As we know, there were 2 tablets when Moses came down from the mountain. The Talmud actually says that the 2 tablets were exactly equal, 6 handbreadths high on both of them. And one of them is the mitzvot between man and God. And the second one is the mitzvot between man and man. Of course, the mitzvot between man and God, the first 3 are obvious. I am the Lord your God. You shall not have other gods besides me. Don't take God's name in vain. Even the Sabbath, God rested on the 7th day, and therefore, imitatio Dei, we mimic God. However, what is the one with the parents is also interesting. The Talmud in Sanhedrin says the reason why the idea of honoring your parents is on this first tablet is due to the fact that hukash kvodan lichvod shamayim, their honor is compared to the honor of heaven, because after all, there are 3 partners that bring you into the world. Your father, your mother who bring in the body, and God who breathes in the soul for every new life. And so there's this partnership between your parents and God to bring you in. So that's on the first side. And the second side is between man and man. Do not murder, and do not commit adultery, and do not steal, do not bear a false testimony, false witness, and do not covet things that are not yours. I want to look at this then, not exactly metaphorically, but as ideas, as suggestions of how to understand the relationship man to God and the relationship man to man, also as not only affirmations, but as do's and don'ts, and a certain hierarchy in this relationship. Let's take it from the beginning. On the level between man and God. I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. That's number 1. Now, there is a discussion among our sages whether I am the Lord your God is actually a command or not, because there is no command mode within that statement. And it says that I am the Lord your God. It's not in the imperative, so it doesn't seem like a command. A command is do or don't. But let's look into a moment. There is a discussion between Maimonides, Halachot Gedolot, and some of the enumerators of the mitzvot concerning that first statement, whether the first statement is an introduction or actually a command. There's an interesting point of view of the Halachot Gedolot. It says that the mitzvah there is not to believe that God exists, which is a prerequisite of all the commands, but to believe that God is involved in human life, that there's divine providence, that God cares about what happens to man. And therefore it says, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. You should know, I took you out of Egypt. I was there. I heard the suffering. I realized that enough was enough. And I enabled that to happen. Now, I have a friend who lives in Montreal who was a rabbi in Bucharest for 3 years. I remember years ago, he said about the famous statement in Pirkei Avot, chapter 3, Akavia ben Mahalalel. He's a great scholar and member of the Sanhedrin. He said, you have to know 3 things, and then you shall not come to sin. Excuse me. One is, know where you came from, because you came from a putrid drop, know where you're going, which is a grave of worms and maggots, and then know before whom you are going to stand in judgment. Now, it sounds very depressing. Know where you came from. You came from putrid drop. Where you're going to the grave. It doesn't sound very optimistic. And know before whom you are going to give an account, before the Holy One, blessed be He. Well, my friend, his name is Rabbi Rosen, said a very important point, and I think this is he says that's really the most optimistic statement in all of the Mishnah. Because what is Akavia ben Mahalalel saying to us? Saying to us, God cares. You're going to be giving an account after 120, after this lifetime, because God cares about everything you did in this world. He wants to know what you did. Maybe you did something good too. Can you imagine if you go through life and nobody cares? So this idea that you're going to give an account, that God really cares. He cares when you hurt your knee. He cares when you suffered. He cares when you were happy. You'll give that account, and everything will be listened to in detail. That's a very optimistic idea, that the world is not just by chance, that it's not just a hit and run. The prophet Ezekiel, and I quote, it's Ezekiel 8, chapter 12. And he said to me, have you seen, son of man, that the elders of the house of Israel, they are doing in the dark, in their rooms, because they say that God doesn't see, that God has left the land. So the Torah is saying God doesn't leave the land. Even when God decides not to punish, even when God hides his face, God is there. I took you out of Egypt. So, rule number one, if you want to put it that way. I wouldn't call it rule though, but point number one. Life is not an accident. And your life has meaning. And there's teleological meaning. There is a goal, there is a point, there's a reason why you are in this world. Even if you don't know what it is. I've always said that when we enter life, it's like entering a movie in the middle. You don't know how it started. You're definitely not going to find out how it finished. So you have to make sense out of it. Takes time, but you have to make sense out of it. And you really have to make sense out of it because you're the main actor. Definitely in your film, you're the main actor. So you have to work as quickly as you can to figure out what is your role and what are you doing. So there is meaning to life. That's what the Torah is saying. I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. Know that. Point number one, life is not an accident. It is not arbitrary. There is meaning. Look for it. Point number two. Let's go back to the Decalogue. You shall not have any gods besides me. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness in the heavens above, on the earth below, or in the waters under the heavens. What does that mean? It connects to number one, because there's two parts to number one. I talked about the fact that God says, I took you out of Egypt, out of bondage. It's, I am the Lord your God. Meaning, I'm the Lord your God. Don't have other gods besides me. What does it mean, the heavens above, the earth below, or the waters under the earth? We can only imagine things that we have seen. We can see the stars above through telescopes. We can see what's going on planet Earth. And we can see what's under the waters. That's all. That's it. That's basically everything that we can see. Everything else we have to conjure up from imagining things that we've seen. There's an interesting argument in the 12th century between Maimonides and the Kalam, the Mutakalimun, which was a theological Muslim school of thought. And the Kalam basically said, anything imagined is possible because if you imagined it, it means that you saw it. Maimonides, who actually argues with them and says that you could imagine things that are impossible, like let's say a centaur, which is the head of a man in the body of a deer. But you've seen deers and you've seen men, but by putting them together, it doesn't seem like it's something that you'll ever find. But still, the idea is correct that when we create even sci-fi movies or whatever, it's all based on things that we have already seen, and we just play around with them, basically. That's what it means. Everything that's your imagination or anything which is in the human experience, don't turn that into a God. You know why? Because I'm God. So, but then there's also a human inclination to turn things into gods. We make power our God. We make the desire for power a God. We make money into a God. We make fame into a God. We make lots of things into gods. So God says there's only one. So destroy all the rest, because the real God is transcendental. He's not part of the skit. He's nowhere here. So everything that you are seeing and imagining, that's not it. So get your life under control. And also remember, you're not God either. I've always said, it says in the book of Hosea, Shuva Yisrael ad Hashem Elohecha ki chashalta ba'avonecha. Return, O Israel, up to the Lord your God, because you're fallen in sin. What does that mean, up to? Sometimes people become newly religious and they get very enthusiastic and they start telling other people how to live their lives. You know what? You're not God. Don't tell people how to live their lives, because that position called God, it's taken already. Destroy all the gods, because you're going to create gods. You're going to create gods in your image, because that's what idolatry is. God created man in his image. Idols are creating gods in our image, because we idolize things which we should not. There are lots of things in life that we need, but they don't have to be idolized. We need a certain amount of wealth to survive. We might even need a little bit of connections and power sometimes in our lives. We need houses and sustenance. Yeah, they're things that we need, but don't idolize them. They'll make them more than they are. You're not going to take them with you. So there already is a God, and that God is transcendent. Kill the other gods and live your life in a way of significance and not serving empty gods. That's number 2. Let's go to number 3. That's what I'm saying. You shall not bow to them or serve them, because you're going to be serving yourself, which means your evil inclinations, when you bow down and you serve to them. Okay. Number 3, you shall not swear falsely by the name of God. For God will not clear one who swears falsely by God's name. That relates to something I was just saying before. Doesn't mean don't take God's name in vain. There are lots of people, as I said, who get really into the, what I call, enthusiastic about being religious, and they start using God, meaning they actually have an agenda, but no, it's not me, it's God, right? How could you argue against it? They think they are the sole representatives of the Almighty on this planet. God says, you know what? Don't use my name in vain. You got an agenda, push your agenda. Leave me out of it. Leave me out of it. I remember a story I heard one time from the late Professor Pinchas Pelly. He used to give lectures for young people in the Catskill Mountains, right next to New York City, at a hotel. It was a kosher hotel. And one day he walks in. It's a Saturday morning. They usually have a kiddush. There's a reception after the service. And he saw a big sign said, if you're not in this hotel, don't participate in the reception, because, and then he quoted from Maimonides about things that you're not allowed to steal or whatever, which of course is in the 10 Commandments. So Right away, he walked over to the owner of the hotel. He says, look, if you want to be stingy, that's your decision. But don't blame Maimonides on your stinginess. So, anyhow, the point is that people have agendas in life and they like using God or the Torah. It's not me, it's God, it's the Torah. It's it. So God says, leave me out. Don't take my name in vain for your agendas. That's number 3. So what is number 4? Number 4, I think we all know, it's the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor. By the way, the Torah is saying, you shall labor during those 6 days. You have to be part of the world. You have to work for your livelihood. You have to be involved in this world because that's why I put you in the first place. You shall do your work. You, your son, your daughter, the stranger. Because in 6 days, God made heavens and earth and all that was among them and rested on the 7th day. Therefore, he blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. God is saying like this. As a human being, you have to be involved in this world. You have to eat, you have to work. You need clothing, you have to work. You need a house, you have to work. I know that. I want you to be involved in the world. But I want you to realize that if you want to realize yourself as a human being, the physicality will not be enough. So I have an idea. Just like I rested on the 7th day and created a structure, a framework, I want you to rest on that 7th day, create a framework for your spiritual world, where you sort of create a bubble of 24 hours, where you remove yourself from inventing and creating in this world for one day in that week. And during that time, I want you to look inwards in yourselves, in your family, in your friends, and look for that spark of godliness within you, that spiritual enrichment which is within your own soul, and develop it to help you become more of a human being. That'll help the balance. Because if you don't have that, and all of life just becomes trying to accomplish more and more, it's just going to be a rat race, which is not going to lead you anywhere. So if we're talking about the relationship between man and God, find me on that 7th day. I know you're going to get lost during the other 6, but during that 7th, when you look for me, you'll find yourself. Number 5, honor your father and your mother, that you may long endure on the land that God has assigned to you. Why is this over here? This also relates to the idea. God is basically saying, look, you're never going to understand me. As Joseph Albo once said, Rabbi Joseph Albo, the 15th century, if I knew God, I would be God. So you're not going to understand me. And in most cases, people are not going to be prophets. So I'll give you an idea what to do. Learn to honor your parents. When you learn to honor your parents, it'll teach you menschlichkeit. It'll teach you how to be a good human being. It'll teach you how to recognize when somebody did something for you, those people who got up in the middle of the night when you cried. It'll teach you how to be a giving person too. Your children will teach you how to be a giving person, and your parents of your children, when you'll have to help them, when they might become more feeble in their lives. Honor your parents, because it'll teach you how to be a good human being. Because you can give me honor too, but you don't really know what you're doing. So start with your parents. There's a famous statement by the Jewish-born French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, who once said on the famous verse in Leviticus chapter 19, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha." Of course, this is mentioned also in the New Testament, but not with this ending. It says, love your neighbor as yourself. I am God. Levinas says, what does that mean? He says, I'll tell you what it means. if you can love your neighbor as yourself, if you can realize that there is somebody else out there, outside your 4 cubits of egocentricity, there's somebody else who also has pain, who also has problems. If you're able to move out of that brick wall of egocentricity and realize that, then you can also realize there's a God. It's called love your neighbor as yourself, I am God. Because only people who are able, have that ability, that empathy, to be able to move out of just thinking about their own needs and realize that there are others out there, can also discover a relationship with God. This you can discover with your parents. I'm not talking about cases where you have brutal parents. That happens sometimes. In a case like that. And there are halachic issues about that. Sometimes you don't have to honor your parents if they're doing things which are inhuman. But I'm talking about the regular relationship with parents. No, parents are not perfect. Children are not perfect either. And in that relationship, we discover a lot of things. We discover how to be thankful, to be grateful, and how to give. And that's what makes us human. So these are 5 ideas of the relationship between man and God. And that's the first 5 on the question here of what I call the first 5 of the principles of the first luach, the first tablet, which is called Between Man and God. Next week, I'll talk about the second tablet, the 5 principles between man and man. Shalom, shalom.